Reports are now confirming that this was a covert attack by Israel on the Hezbollah. Once again, West Asia is on the brink of a bigger conflict. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, meanwhile, is all set to meet Donald Trump next week in the US. Trump has praised Prime Minister Modi as, and I'm quoting, a fantastic man. At the same time, he calls India a very big abuser of trade ties. We'll also talk about why Iran is planning to deport 2 million refugees back to Afghanistan and how Russia is planning to expand its influence in Africa through a fuel pipeline. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. In India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's cabinet clears the One Nation, One Election proposal. This comes after a panel headed by former President Ram Nath Kovind submitted its report, which calls for holding simultaneous elections for the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies. The bill will be introduced in the winter session of Parliament. Staying with India, Jammu and Kashmir votes in the first phase of the assembly elections. 7 districts went to the polls today. 2 more phases of polling still remain. The results will be announced on the 8th of October. This is the first assembly election in Jammu and Kashmir since it lost its special status in 2019. China sanctions 9 U.S. defense firms. This is in response to Washington approving the sale of military equipment to Taiwan. Beijing claims the deal threatens China's security. This is the latest standoff between the US and China. In recent months, the two countries have been at loggerheads over trade, technology, and the South China Sea. Tanzania accuses the US and West of interference. Its president slams Western nations for meddling in her country's affairs. The rebuke comes after the US called for an independent investigation into the murder of a Tanzanian opposition leader. And a big legal win for Google. A European Union court scraps its $1.6 billion fine. The penalty was imposed by Brussels 5 years ago. It had accused Google of abusing its dominant market position in online advertising. We can strike you wherever you are and whenever we want. That's the message Israel is sending to the Hezbollah today, although Israel won't admit it officially. But they've pulled off one of the most sophisticated covert operations in modern history. It's the stuff of sci-fi thrillers. Thousands of pagers blew up at the same time in Lebanon. It wasn't a coincidence. This was a coordinated attack, and it spanned 2 countries, Lebanon and Syria. Israel had rigged 5,000 pagers with explosives. Their spy agency, the Mossad, planned and executed this operation. Several media reports are now confirming their role, and Lebanon has vowed to take revenge.
We blame the Israeli enemy, the full responsibility of this criminal attack that also harmed civilians and led to the martyrdom of a number of people and the injury of a high number of people with several wounds. Hezbollah has assured that this treacherous and criminal enemy will get the fair punishment for this cowardly attack, where they can expect it and where they cannot expect it. And God is a witness to what we say.
This was a massive attack. Thousands are injured across Lebanon, including the Iranian envoy to Beirut. At least 12 people are dead. A Hezbollah lawmaker's son is among them.
This is a new Israeli aggression against Lebanon, and the resistance will retaliate in a suitable way at a suitable time, God willing.
Explosions were reported from Syria too. Pagers of Hezbollah fighters blew up in Syria as well. Hezbollah had played a role in the Syrian conflict. It has close ties with the Assad regime. Reports say hundreds of Hezbollah fighters in Damascus were hit in this attack. They're being treated in hospitals. So how did Israel pull this off? That's the question on everyone's mind. Obviously, we don't have Israel's version. They rarely claim credit for any covert operation behind enemy lines, so it is difficult to narrow down on an exact timeline of events. But some early assessments suggest that this operation was plotted months ago, most likely around February. The war in Gaza was already on then. At the same time, tensions were high on Israel's northern border. Israel and Hezbollah were engaged in a low-intensity conflict. Israeli forces were conducting targeted airstrikes and killing Hezbollah's fighters. Hezbollah was responding with aerial attacks of its own. Its leaders felt that they were vulnerable to Israeli spying, so they wanted a stronger intelligence infrastructure. More importantly, they wanted to avoid any leaks. So they decided to go old school. They said their people would dump their cell phones. That's what the leadership in Hezbollah decided. Dump the cell phones and start using pagers instead. They're also called beepers in some countries. These devices are wireless. They transmit short text messages. And this technology is quite old. In fact, pagers were widely used in the 1980s and 90s until cell phones replaced them. Basically, cell phones made pagers obsolete. So perhaps Hezbollah felt that pagers would be less vulnerable. They ordered thousands of them, and these devices were distributed to a large number of people, including civilians. That's right, it wasn't just Hezbollah fighters. These rigged pagers fell into the hands of civilians too. A 10-year-old girl is among those who died in this attack. People in Lebanon are being asked to get rid of all pagers now. The attack has once again put West Asia on the edge. Europe's top diplomat says this is bad news for the region.
I am trying to get in touch with Beirut in order to get more information and clarification. But certainly everything that puts trouble in the region is a bad news. So I cannot comment.
The Americans have spoken out as well. The US was quick to distance itself from these attacks, but when asked about Israel's role, the Pentagon stuck to its usual talking points. Listen to this.
Just following up on the pagers question, does DoD assess that this was an attack by Israel, and do you consider this an escalation of the tensions on the northern border?
Yeah, as far as what it is, again, I just don't have anything to provide. And as far as escalation, broadly speaking, in the Middle East, I mean, this is something that we've been paying attention to for more than almost a year now, since Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7. And so we've been very, very focused.
It's a tone-deaf response. The Americans are hoping that a ceasefire in Gaza would put an immediate end to all these hostilities. But honestly, we're way past that. This operation is a significant escalation. Israel planted bombs inside the pockets of thousands of people in Lebanon. They were carrying these bomb devices around for months, completely unaware, until Israel pressed the trigger. This wasn't a targeted strike, not aimed at some Hezbollah commander or a particular high-value target. This was a large-scale attack, quite dramatic and chilling. Something that gives Hezbollah an excuse to launch a full-scale offensive. Not that they needed an excuse, but this attack only makes a very bad situation worse. So pagers were turned into bombs. But how did this happen? Like I said, no one knows for sure, but reports suggest tampering. You see, recently Hezbollah ordered around 3,000 pagers. Labels point to a Taiwanese company. That firm has now denied any involvement in the attack. These devices were fitted with explosives, which could be triggered remotely. So when the time was right, the trigger was activated and 3,000 of these devices exploded. But is this mechanism limited to just pagers? Can it happen to any device, say laptops or even your mobile phone? Can it be triggered to explode while it is in your pocket or in your hand? Our next report tells you.
It was around 3:45 p.m. local time. Pagers in Lebanon received a message. It seemed like business as usual, like a message from the Hezbollah leadership. Instead, this was a trigger. The message activated explosives. Soon, there was smoke coming out of people's pockets before explosions were reported across Lebanon. The blasts continued for an hour. At least 12 people were killed. Thousands are injured. But the question is, how did it happen? Well, the initial guess was a hack, something that made the batteries overheat. Soon, experts ruled it out. So then came another guess, tampering. And that's what officials are going by. Some tampered with these devices. All fingers pointed at Israel. But how did they pull it off? Well, it had to be done in the supply chain, before the pagers even reached Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah ordered these pagers months ago, so it was clearly a long drawn-out plan. The labels pointed at one model, the rugged pager AR-924. They were made by a Taiwanese company, Gold Apollo. But the firm has since denied any involvement. It's redirected the blame to another firm, the Budapest-based BAC Consulting.
Over the past 3 years, Gold Apollo established a long-term private label authorization with this agency called BAC, allowing them to use our trademark for regional sales. Our company provided label authorization to them. This is not a product of Apollo. It is a product I authorized them to use our brand trademark.
But no matter who made it, officials believed that the modus operandi would be the same. The pagers were taken apart, and explosive material was implanted right next to the battery. It was as little as 1 to 2 ounces, but just enough to get the job done. A switch was also added, so that it could be triggered remotely. Now, it's surprising Hezbollah did not consider this. Electronic devices are usually not made in Lebanon. They're imported from outside. And that means there's always a chance of sabotage. Plus, it's not new for Israel. In 1996, its security agency, the Shin Bet, killed Yahya Ayash. He was a Hamas bomb maker. Israel hid explosives in his phone. When he took a call, it exploded. Since then, Hezbollah has mostly used pagers to avoid detection. Now, pagers are the ancestors of smartphones, but still reliable technology. So the group depended on thousands of pagers. They thought they could prevent surveillance, but they did not consider this possibility. Which brings us to technology. Israel caused a cell phone to explode in the 1990s. 2 decades later, it was a pager. So technically, anything can be hacked.
So, it's somewhat surprising that Hezbollah would rely on pagers, knowing that Israel has a history going back decades of being able to detonate electronic devices. Ironically, there were reports in the media not that long ago that Hezbollah essentially broadcast to the world that they were downgrading from cell phones to pagers in order to prevent Israeli intelligence from tracking people using the GPS capabilities. Why they would broadcast something like that to the world.
Either way, it was an intelligence infiltration like no other. Israel may not admit to it, but it was an operational achievement. The investigations have started. This case will be studied for years. And a breach of this magnitude will make groups question their security apparatus for years to come.
No one has claimed responsibility for the Lebanon pager attack, but Hezbollah is convinced that it was Israel. What makes them so sure, though? Because of Israel's history of assassinations. Israel and its spy agency Mossad have done similar things in the past. They have conducted complex operations to kill their enemies. They've even used communication devices before. Let's look at some of the most famous examples. One of the earliest was the killing of Mahmoud Hamshari. This took place in the early 1970s. Hamshari was accused of being involved in the 1972 Munich massacre. 11 members of the Israeli Olympics team had been killed during the 1972 Munich Olympic Games. Israel had vowed revenge. They accused Hamshari of being involved, so he was on their hit list. Now, Hamshari was the representative of the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, to France. He was based in Paris. Mossad agents lured him away from his house. They then broke into his home, took his phone apart, packed explosives inside, and then left. On the 8th of December 1972, Hamshari answered the phone, and an Israeli team remotely detonated the explosive inside. Hamshari lost a leg in the explosion. He died a month later due to these injuries. So Israel used explosives in a communication device all the way back in 1972, and this wasn't a one-off. There was also the 1996 assassination of Yahya Ayash. He was a bomb maker for Hamas, and he was nicknamed the Engineer. Ayash was one of the founders of Hamas's military wing and reportedly the mastermind behind a number of suicide bombings. He was targeted by different Israeli security agencies called the Shin Bet. But their tactic was the same as Mossad's. They swapped out Ayash's phone, placed explosives inside it, and waited for him to answer a call. When they confirmed that it was indeed Ayash speaking, Shin Bet remotely detonated the explosive, killing him instantly. This attack took place in 1996. About 23 years after Hamshari was killed in the same way. The following year, in 1997, Israel changed tactics. They opted for poison. The target was Khalid Mashal, the current chair of the Hamas political bureau, so obviously the poison failed, but only because of intense international pressure. Let me explain. In 1997, two Mossad agents entered Jordan. That's Israel's neighboring country. Hamas had an office there at the time in Jordan. The Mossad agents entered Jordan using fake Canadian passports. And they had a device with them which could transmit a poison. They waited for Mashal at the entrance of the Hamas office. When he arrived, they placed their device next to his left ear. Mashal later said he heard a loud noise, but he thought he had escaped unscathed. The two Mossad agents were caught by his bodyguard, so Mashal believed that he was fine. But later that day, he started feeling weak, he began vomiting, and he was rushed to a hospital. The attack created a diplomatic storm. Jordan demanded that Israel turn over the antidote to the poison. The kingdom threatened to nullify a 1994 peace treaty between Israel and Jordan. Israel's prime minister at the time was Benjamin Netanyahu. Yes, he's been around for quite a while. We're talking about 1997. Netanyahu was under a lot of pressure. The US, under then President Bill Clinton, intervened and forced him to send an antidote to the poison. In exchange, the captured Mossad agents were returned to Israel. All these incidents were complex assassination plots. They targeted individuals. But Israel has also carried out large-scale attacks. In 2008, Mossad unleashed a computer virus in Iran. It was called the Stuxnet virus. It targeted Iran's nuclear program, incapacitating a uranium enrichment facility. The Stuxnet virus is sometimes called the world's first known cyber weapon. And Israel is the country that unleashed it. In 2021, the same nuclear facility was targeted again. A cyber attack caused rolling blackouts there and led to some explosions. These are some of Israel's most famous operations. The intricate ones not involving airstrikes or drone or brute force. Yesterday's pager strike was a sophisticated scheme as well, right up Mossad's alley. But they're unlikely to take credit, not for years to come at least. Sri Lanka. We are here in the capital, Colombo. The island nation is gearing up for elections, the first since the mass protests of 2022. A record 38 candidates are on the ballot, but only 3 really matter. That's current President Ranil Wickremesinghe, centrist leader Sajith Premadasa, and Marxist candidate Anura Kumara Dissanayake. So it's a 3-party contest with no clear frontrunner yet. So who will be Sri Lanka's next president, and what will it mean for the country's future? Our next report tells you.
Colombo feels like it's back on track. The airport was buzzing with tourists. The roads were packed with cars. And for a change, no snaking lines at gas stations. No frenzy for fuel or food. Perhaps Sri Lanka has exorcised the ghosts of 2022. The main junctions are draped in colourful flags and posters. It's the unmistakable sign of what's around the corner: elections. Voting is scheduled to take place on Saturday, but today was the last day of campaigning. Many of the final rallies were organised in Colombo. It was the final pitch before the big day. There are 38 candidates in the fray, all of them men. But realistically, only these 3 have a chance. Ranil Wickremesinghe is the incumbent. He's part of Sri Lanka's old guard, a 6-time prime minister who is known as a free market proponent. Wickremesinghe wasn't elected by the people. He was chosen by members of parliament. When former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled, someone had to take over. Someone had to fix the mess. And that job fell upon Wickremesinghe. He's done a decent job so far. Negotiated a repayment deal with Colombo's main lenders, struck a bailout agreement with the IMF and also brought down inflation from 70% to around 6% earlier this year. But problems remain. Many voters feel that Wickremesinghe's bitter pill was too bitter. The taxes and utility bills are too high.
Government should focus on the people's foods and education and medicine, and they are not focusing them. They are focusing tax-free vehicles and giving lakhs and lakhs of money for the rural development for the MPs.
Wickremesinghe leads the United National Party, but he's not contesting on their ticket. Instead, he's contesting as an independent. Why? We'll try to get an answer when we interview him tomorrow. But for now, candidate number 2, Sajith Premadasa. He leads the SJB party in Sri Lanka, and he's political royalty. His father was the 3rd president of the country. Ideologically, he's somewhere in the middle. Premadasa has talked about diluting the bitter pill. He wants rich people to shoulder more burdens.
There are burdens that have to be imposed, that the super rich and the rich have to disproportionately take a bigger share of the burden rather than working men and women of Sri Lanka.
Premadasa has been a cabinet member. He's also been the leader of the opposition, but he's never been president. In 2019, he was defeated by Gotabaya Rajapaksa, so this election could be his chance at glory. The 3rd candidate is Anura Kumara Dissanayake, arguably the most controversial one. Dissanayake's party is the People's Liberation Front. It started off as a Marxist group, but very soon veered to violent Sinhalese nationalism. The PLF waged 2 insurrections in the 1970s and 1980s. Tens of thousands died in the bloodbath. But Dissanayake says that that's all in the past. He has positioned himself as a champion of the working class, a break from Colombo's ruling elite.
The people of our country have a great expectation for change. There are many people who took part in public protests who carry the aspirations of those protests. They wanted change, and we are the agents of that change. All the other candidates are the agents of the old, failed traditional system.
Abandoning bullets for ballots is good, but Dissanayake's past still haunts Sri Lanka's minorities, and his economic plan has many gaps. Dissanayake has promised to renegotiate the bailout deal with the IMF, but he doesn't say why the IMF would agree to it, or what leverage he has. A Rajapaksa is also in the fray. Namal Rajapaksa, the son of former Prime Minister Mahinda. Most experts agree that he will lose, but that's sort of the point here, testing out the political waters, seeing if the people will accept a Rajapaksa comeback. Stranger things have happened in politics, but 2022 is perhaps too fresh in people's memory. The long lines to buy food and fuel, the shortages at hospitals. It was the worst financial crisis in Sri Lanka's independent history. A crisis brought about by fiscal mismanagement. And that's when people said, enough is enough. Thousands poured onto the streets, demanding the president's ouster. From there to now, Sri Lanka has come a long way. The IMF says the country is making good progress, but it's not out of the woods yet. A lot will depend on who wins this election. If Wickremesinghe wins, expect policy continuity. If Premadasa wins, expect minor disruptions. And if Dissanayake wins, all bets are off. The bailout talks may get complicated. Voters here know that the stakes are high. Their decision will be based on multiple factors: the horror of 2022, the stability since then, and the cost of economic recovery.
The world has its eyes on this election, but no country is watching it more closely than India. India's diplomats have been navigating a challenging neighborhood. Relations with China and Pakistan remain strained, and that's putting it mildly. Nepal's political shake-up has sparked instability. The situation in the east is even worse, where Bangladesh remains in turmoil. Sheikh Hasina's departure has been a setback for New Delhi. In Myanmar, the junta's grip on power is being challenged by the rebels. Afghanistan has a terrorist regime. The Maldives is a slippery customer that India is trying to work with. Given all of this, the election in Sri Lanka comes at a critical time for India. New Delhi has a significant stake in the stability of Sri Lanka. It would want to see some continuity in policy. Of course, the choice of president rests with the people of Sri Lanka, and New Delhi respects that, but it does have some expectations from the next leader here in the interests of both bilateral ties and regional stability. And topping this list is security and the urgent need to ensure that, especially against the growing Chinese footprint in the region. When Sri Lanka's next president takes oath, in hopefully a few days from now, he'll have an important decision to make about China's so-called research vessels, which are in fact spy ships that become frequent visitors to this island. They have been spotted often in the Indian Ocean. China says that these ships are on research assignments, that they're being used to study the ocean. But ask any expert, any observer, and they'll tell you that China uses these research ships for spying. So this year, Colombo imposed a moratorium. It banned all research vessels from docking in Sri Lanka. So no Chinese ship has docked in Sri Lanka this year, but this won't last, this arrangement, because the moratorium expires in January next year. And the next president could decide to renew it and block all future visits, or he could do away with the restrictions altogether. Needless to say, India would want the moratorium to stay, or at the very least, New Delhi would want Colombo to help it in keeping this Chinese activity in check. The second point of concern is trade, and again, China is a factor here. There are big-ticket Chinese projects in the pipeline, like the port city Colombo. We've told you about this project before on the show. China is building an entire city here in Colombo. The port city is being built on land reclaimed from the ocean. Beijing has already invested $1.4 billion in this project, and unlike the Hambantota port, there is widespread backing for port city Colombo. It's a stone's throw from where we are standing. The three top candidates in the presidential race, Ranil Wickremesinghe, Sajid Premadasa and Anurag Kumara Dissanayake, all three support this project. Now, India, however, feels differently. Reports say that New Delhi has reservations about this project, and for good reasons. Sri Lanka would like to see Indian companies invest in Port City, but India remains wary. It is said to have made counter proposals to boost investment in Sri Lanka and develop its critical infrastructure. So this is the second area of concern for India, the trade. The next president will have to find a way to strike a balance and address India's concerns and ensure a level playing field. The third point is Sri Lanka's economy and its long-term stability. That depends on the economy. Colombo cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of the past. It has creditors to answer to. In 2022, when its economy had collapsed, many countries offered support, countries other than India and China. Sri Lanka has borrowed money from the likes of Japan and France as well, and all these creditors would like to see a stable and sound economic policy to keep supporting Sri Lanka's economic recovery. India is hoping for the next leader to be sensitive to all of this. At the same time, it is engaging with all key players, because at the end of the day, a bilateral relationship is with a country and its people, not the individuals who hold power. Earlier this month, Ajit Doval was in Sri Lanka. He is India's national security advisor. And Doval met with all the leading presidential candidates separately. He had one-on-one meetings with them. And this is a good approach. Whoever wins this election, India will have to find a way to work with them, because not doing it is not an option. The stakes are simply too high. Vantage continues after a short break.
Big one coming in, an update that we're getting you. All right. Now let's tell our viewers a little bit more about what is in store in these elections, and we're going to be playing these graphics for our viewers just to give you a good sense. Look at these beautiful shikaras. We've got our shikaras to tell our viewers, about the importance of not just the shikaras, which is such an important thing for Srinagar and all those, who have been going to Srinagar ever since the application of Article 370. Tourism, in fact, has seen a massive increase and people have enjoyed these shikaras. So, assembly polls happening after a decade, after 10 long years in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. First elections post the application of Article 370, and, right now, what's really important is that there is heightened terror, because we have seen an uptick and surge in terror-related activities, which has been very concerning for the security forces, especially in the Jammu region because of the tough terrain, the forested area. So the militants, they have changed their tactics and they are adopting various means to try and disturb the peace in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So polls are happening amid renewed terror incidents. You have 24 of the 90 seat that is going to vote today. So all in all, there are 90 seats, and this election in Jammu and Kashmir is going to happen in 3 phases, as I had said before. The first phase happening today, 24 seats are going to poll, 16 seats in the valley, 8 in Jammu region. So 16 seats are going to polls today in the valley, which is extremely significant. And then you have 1.23 lakh first-time voters in phase 1. What is going to be very important is the youth participation.
India is, and I'm quoting, a very big abuser. That's what Donald Trump has said. He's the Republican presidential nominee. He's in the race to be the next president of the United States of America, one of India's key trade and strategic partners. Yesterday, Trump was speaking at his first campaign event since a second assassination attempt on him. And he described India as a very big abuser of the US-India trade relationship. But at the same time, he called Prime Minister Modi, and I'm quoting again, a fantastic man whom he's set to meet next week when Modi travels to the US. Now, this is a confusing sentiment and statement, but it's part of a pattern. Where is this coming from? And what does this mean for US-India trade? Here is a report.
Driver! Walk straight back! Keep walking!
Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt last week. And yesterday, he took to the stage again. The Republican presidential nominee addressed a town hall in Michigan, and he labeled India a very big abuser. But in the same breath, he called Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi a fantastic man.
So when India, which is a very big abuser, he happens to be coming to meet me next week, and Modi, he's fantastic man. India is very tough.
PM Modi will visit the United States on September 21st. This will be his first visit to the country since he won a historic third term in office. PM Modi will attend the Quad Leaders Summit, which will be hosted by US President Joe Biden. The Quad group is formally called the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. It began as a partnership after the devastating 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. It includes India, the US, Australia and Japan. Apart from Quad, PM Modi will attend the UN General Assembly in New York and meet with the Indian diaspora. And now, the US presidential candidate has added another item to his list. Trump says PM Modi will meet him. The details are not clear yet, but by the looks of it, a trade discussion is on the cards. Because when Trump called India an abuser, he was referring to the US-India trade relationship. The US is one of India's key trade partners. For years now, Trump has criticized India for imposing heavy tariffs on imports. A tariff is a tax. It is imposed by one country on the goods and services imported from another country. It protects an economy from import competition. And Trump doesn't like it one bit. In fact, Trump says he will bring in reciprocal trade if he comes into power, meaning he will charge the same amount of tariff as other countries, and he has brought it up on several occasions. In August last year, Trump talked about India's high tax rates on American goods. He threatened to introduce reciprocal taxes. Trump has brought it up when he was in power as well. In 2018, when he was serving as president, Trump called PM Modi a beautiful, fantastic man. But even then, he had raised the issue of high import duty. He shared the example of Harley-Davidson motorbikes that are produced in the United States and the high import duties on it imposed by India. In 2019, Trump brought up the same issue, and this was not an empty threat. 3 months later, the US terminated India's designation as a beneficiary developing country. Under this, certain products can enter the United States duty-free. But India was removed on grounds of not providing equitable and reasonable access to its markets. This deeply hurt trade ties between the two countries. Over time, trade relations between India and the United States have improved. Just last year, they signed a slew of technology and defense deals. This signaled a new era of bilateral relations. Cooperation between the two countries has deepened. But now India's back on Trump's radar, and he may very well come back to power. We are no fortune tellers, but this is not a good sign for US-India trade ties.
Our next story is about Iran. Their new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, recently held his first press conference. He spoke for over 2 hours and addressed a host of issues like Iran's economy, the future of Tehran's relations with the West, and fostering better relations with existing partners like China and Russia. But Iran doesn't just want to rely on its old friends. Pezeshkian has a grand plan. He wants Iran to strengthen ties with the whole Muslim world. He spoke about a grand Islamic union of nations, something like the European Union, where member states would forego borders, enabling the free movement of Muslim people. It's quite the utopian idea, but it's in stark contrast to his actions, really, and the current policies that he's pursuing. You see, as Pezeshkian preaches open borders, his country is shoring up its own boundary, the eastern border that it shares with Afghanistan. We recently told you how Iran is looking to build a wall along its border with Afghanistan. Apparently, the Taliban there are on board with this plan too. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because they have more that they've planned. Not only is Tehran building a wall, it is also cracking down on migrants who are already inside Iran. Tehran plans to deport about 2 million refugees, 2 million Afghan refugees. They are fellow Muslim people, the same people that Pezeshkian apparently wants to open borders for. So what explains these clearly divergent actions? First, let's look at the situation in Iran. The country neighbors Afghanistan. They share a 900-kilometer long border. Afghanistan has been in turmoil for decades. It has been the site of one war or another since the late 1970s. And the latest was the US occupation and their fight against the Taliban. The Taliban won, as things turned out, and the Americans withdrew in 2021. But they left a trail of devastation in their wake, and the Taliban have taken over, imposing strict theocratic governance on the Afghan people. Now, considering all of this, it's no wonder that the Afghan people are leaving in droves. They've been fleeing the country for decades, and they often just go across the border to Iran. Iran officially hosts about 4 million Afghan refugees. Unofficially, that number may be as high as 10 million. Iran's total population is about 19 million. So Afghan refugees could make up as much as 11% of their population. Such numbers are hard to sustain, especially when your own country is in dire straits. Iran has been subjected to years of Western sanctions. All its core industries are distressed. President Pezeshkian said that all major sectors face a crisis, and Iran was, and I'm quoting, Iran was headed towards a collapse if conditions did not change. That's what he said. This is the present situation. Iran is struggling. So it has decided to prioritize its own citizens. It is rounding up all the undocumented Afghans it can find and shipping them back across the border to lessen the burden on its own economy. And deportations may be the kindest thing it is doing. Inflation is hurting Iranians. The price of bread is surging there. So Tehran has decided to ban bread sales to Afghan migrants. This sign was put up in a border province. It roughly translates to the sale of bread to foreigners is prohibited. Foreigners here means Afghan refugees. Iran can no longer afford to sell bread to Afghan migrants. That's how bad things are. So the deportations are a quick fix. Tehran hopes that this will relieve some pressure. They don't care if it completely contradicts Pezeshkian's grand plan, because the president's words are just that, words, empty rhetoric. They may sound good to some, but they won't fix Iran's real problems. Deporting Afghans may be more effective. It may actually relieve some pressure. But that too is not a long-term solution. The only real solution is an end to sanctions, perhaps a normalization of Iran's ties with the rest of the world. But considering the current global situation, that's just a pipe dream. Now let's turn our attention to Europe, another region that's been keen on shutting borders. The EU doesn't want migrants, it doesn't want Chinese cars, and now it seems that chocolate is on the chopping block too. Specifically, the El Morgine chocolate, the chocolate spread from Algeria, which recently became a sensation in France. This Algerian product, this chocolate spread, was getting rave reviews. It was going viral on social media. People were queuing up to try the chocolate hazelnut delight. But then suddenly, the EU shut it down. The spread was banned, just as it was gaining momentum. Now, Europe says the product failed to meet import standards, but Algeria doesn't buy that. It thinks that this is the latest example of European protectionism. Here's our report.
Everyone's supposed to love a good underdog tale. David versus Goliath. Rocky versus Apollo Creed. Leicester City winning the English Premier League in 2016. But elsewhere in Europe, it seems that underdog stories are frowned upon, and sometimes nipped in the bud outright. That seems to be happening now. To El Morgine. El Morgine is a chocolate hazelnut spread, made by an Algerian brand called C'est Bon. The spread has been making waves recently, thanks to hype generated on social media.
Yes, it's very popular. All the customers come and they're very happy to have it. I'm at risk of running out of stock because there's so much demand.
People in France were lining up to buy the Algerian product. There were long queues, and some stores put limits, telling customers they could only buy 2 jars. The spread's prices were also skyrocketing. For all intents and purposes, this was a success story. A scrappy African brand making a dent in the European market.
It has a very good taste. It's not too sweet. It's good. It's delicious.
But sadly, its sudden popularity had a downside. It caught the eye of the dreaded fun police, European Union regulators. On Friday, the EU banned El Morgine. They seized shipments of the Algerian delicacy, stopping it as it reached the French city of Marseille. The ban has already had its intended effect.
It's expensive. 30 euros.
It seems to me when I was there before that it was cheaper before, but I saw that it had been banned, so in relation to that news, it doesn't surprise me that the price has gone up.
The Algerian chocolate hazelnut spread is now contraband in Europe. Whatever remains in stores is selling at black market rates. Soon there will be illegal smuggling routes for the roasted chocolatey treat. So what reason did the EU give for this ban? What has put this Algerian chocolate spread in a similar category to Chinese electric vehicles or Russian gas and diamonds? Well, this is the explanation France's agricultural ministry gave. They say Algeria cannot export products containing dairy to the EU. El Morgine didn't just come to France last week. It has been around for a while. The EU just seems to have woken up after it went viral. An Algerian official has a theory about this. He says that the EU banned it to ensure the hegemony of Nutella. Nutella is manufactured by the Italian company Ferrero. It's the undisputed market leader in the chocolate spread department. Nutella controls about 3/4 of the market, and it looks like Europe wants to keep it that way. Perhaps El Morgine was flying too high, daring to overshadow an established European juggernaut. So it had its wings clipped. That's the theory anyway. The EU will probably deny it, cite a number of regulations and existing red tape, and probably get away with the ban. So fans of the chocolate spread should start saving up, either for a trip to Algeria or some ridiculously overpriced black market El Morgine.
Moving on to Africa, where Russia is trying to expand its influence, this time through investments. Moscow plans to build a new fuel pipeline. It will be in the Republic of Congo. This pipeline will link a western port city to the capital. It is a joint venture, but Russia controls 90% of it, 90. Moscow will supply the funds. It will provide equipment, it will send personnel for construction, and even provide fuel if needed. In return, Congo will just offer tax relief. So basically, it's a joint venture just in name. This is Moscow's pipeline in Congo. Originally, the project was announced in 2017, but the pandemic delayed it. Then there was the war in Ukraine. So finally, Moscow is bringing it back now in 2024. The question, though, is why now? And the answer is quite simple. Russia wants to expand its footprint in Africa, and it's doing so by wooing the continent. Congo is on top of this list. In the month of June, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited the Central African nation. He stressed on diplomatic cooperation, and that very month, the Congolese president went to Moscow. He met with the Russian president, and they discussed their growing ties. Putin even gave him a state award.
We've made a decision to award you with a Russian state award, so let me proceed with this honorable mission. For the great contribution to the development and strengthening of relations between the Russian Federation and the Republic of the Congo, by a decree of the President of the Russian Federation, Denis Sassou Nguesso is awarded with the Order of Honor.
This was the Congolese leader's second visit to Moscow in less than a year. He was there in July 2023 for a summit, and this year he returned again. That's definitely a good sign for Moscow. And it's not stopping at Congo. In April this year, Moscow sent military trainers to Niger. They will train soldiers. Also help establish an air defense system. It's also sent instructors to Burkina Faso. Russia has also signed military partnerships with 2 other nations. So you get the gist. Russia is on a charm offensive here. It is building pipelines, it is offering military support, it has offered free grains in the past. What is Putin trying to do here? He's looking to counter Western influence where he can, and Africa is arguably the best place to do it. It's the second largest continent in the world, it has the youngest population in the world, and it is growing fast. Africa is home to 30% of the world's mineral reserves. It has 40% of the world's gold, and it sees the West through the lens of its colonial past. Putin is looking to make the most of that. You see, the Ukraine war has divided the world. Countries were quick to choose sides, but Africa did not. It refused to back UN resolutions condemning Russia. African countries did not want to get drawn into a Cold War-like situation. They wanted to avoid camp politics, and for Moscow, that was important. So it's trying to build on it with the help of military, economic, and diplomatic initiatives. Militarily, there's weapons trade and the operations of the Wagner Group, and diplomatically, there's lobbying at the United Nations. But will all of this work? Well, let's look at Moscow's footprint. Right now, it's one of the key players in the continent, but it needs to amp up its investment. In 2019, Putin vowed to double bilateral trade within 5 years. That has not happened. Trade is stalled at $18 billion per year between Moscow and Africa. Foreign direct investment is abysmally low, and Russia doesn't offer much aid either. Plus, there are other players in the mix, other compelling players like China, the United States, and France. They're all vying for influence in Africa, and they're also pumping in a lot more money. So Russia needs to catch up. The pipeline in Congo is a move in that direction. Our last story tonight comes straight from the future. A 64-year-old man in the US has made history. He suffers from ALS. This is a degenerative brain disease. It leads to loss of muscle control. But now, thanks to a brain chip, this patient can control Amazon's Alexa with his brain. He can mentally tap the icons on the virtual assistant. We'll tell you how and discuss the fast-moving advancements in neurotechnology. Here is a report.
This is Mark. He's 64 years old, and he lives with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS in short. This disease affects the nerve cells in the brain and the spinal cord. It causes loss of muscle over time and eventually even the loss of speech. Due to ALS, Mark has limited mobility. He can walk and talk, but he can't use his arms and hands.
It's like watching in a theater.
Mark loves Amazon's virtual assistant Alexa, which he uses with his voice. But now, Mark can control Alexa with his mind too. He can switch on or off the lights, watch TV, make video calls and play music, all by telling Alexa what to do just with his mind. This may sound like science fiction, but this is the reality. Mark has become the first person to do this, thanks to a brain chip. In scientific terms, this is called a brain-computer interface or BCI. It has been made by a tech startup called Synchron. The chip is not available in the market, of course. It's being tested in a clinical trial. If successful, the company will commercialize BCI, and it shares this dream with several other companies, including billionaire Elon Musk's Neuralink, the Neurotechnology company. In January, Neuralink announced that a paralyzed man had successfully undergone a brain chip implant. Months later, Musk shared a video. It showed the man playing online chess by using his thoughts. The chip faces some hiccups. Only 15% of the implant's channels work properly. But that being said, it's a giant leap forward. So is Synchron's successful chip test. But how does it work? Think of the chip as a mesh tent. It's dotted with electrodes. They can collect neural signals. It may be called a brain chip, but this chip is not directly implanted in the brain. Instead, it's inserted into the jugular vein, which lies at the base of the neck. It's connected to the region of the brain that controls voluntary movement. This is a minimally invasive procedure. And once planted, the chip is easy to detect. It wirelessly transmits the intention of movement out of the brain. So paralyzed people can control devices without their hands or without using their voice. They can do so by simply thinking about it. So they literally control technological devices with their minds. It sounds like a superpower. And neurotech companies are already taking this a step forward. They are working to connect brain chips with ChatGPT, the AI chatbot, and with Apple Vision Pro, the mixed reality headset. So far, these technologies are still in the testing phase. But if all goes well, it won't be long before we're living in the future.
Vantage continues after a short break.
That is going to gain prominence. Just how many youth or youngsters are coming out, jobs, unemployment, those are some very big issues. And also development. You have the BJP who have been stressing time and again not to vote for separatism, to vote for peace, prosperity, for security and for jobs, for livelihood in the state. So that is something that the BJP has been stressing on. You have the National Conference and the Congress Party who want to go back. They are vowing to restore full statehood to Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, they're saying that they'll bring back Article 370 as well. Those are some of the promises that are being made by all of these political parties. As I was mentioning about the BJP contesting on the 17 seats out of 24 seats. And as I had just told you, the Congress's and the National Conference's promises. So the BJP contesting on 17 of the 24 seats. That's an important one. And as I've mentioned, employment, development are going to be the big factors, the big factors that will really be of prominence. So there are those visuals there, people coming out in huge numbers. Arnima, my colleague, joins us, me now from Jammu. She's been keeping a very close track. She's been talking to the BSF security forces in the run-up to the first phase of elections. Arnima, some great visuals that we're getting from Jammu region. You know, a lot of enthusiasm, and the voters also looking quite...
Cat reels, puppy videos, baby goat memes, the internet loves its animals, but right now it has a newly crowned star. Mu Deng, a pint-sized pygmy hippo in Thailand. She may be 2 months old, but Mu Deng is trampling all over the internet with her baby feet. Her cheeky expressions and playful nature have raked millions of views, so much so that people are lining up to see her. But Mu Deng isn't letting this fame get to her head. She's sticking close to her mother, playing with her trainer, and plopping on the ground unfazed by her rapid rise to social media stardom. But her zoo is capitalizing on this fame. It is using this as a way to save more such hippos, because if there's one thing the internet loves, it's a cute animal with a cause. Take a look. Now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Hong Kong keeps tradition alive with a 145-year-old fire dragon dance. The worst drought in the history of Amazon lowers water levels to an all-time low. And a super moon with partial lunar eclipse delights stargazers across the globe. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1948, India's Operation Polo was terminated. The operation was launched by the Indian Army to liberate Hyderabad from the Nizam's rule. The princely state of Hyderabad refused to join India after independence. The operation led to its integration into India. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.